Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. We have a lot of crazy updates, more precisely, and first let's talk about the United States of America. This is probably the only political update for this morning. The US will no longer act as a mediator in negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. That was stated by the White House. We will continue to help, but we will no longer fly around the world as mediators at meetings. Now it is a matter for the two sides. The time has come for them to present and develop concrete ideas on how to end this conflict. It will be up to them. That was stated by the United States of America, but from this statement it is very difficult to understand whether the United States of America is going to be neutral in this conflict or they are going to take one of the sides, either the Russian side or the Ukrainian. As for the negotiation process and as for the peaceful settlement, we see that nothing like this is happening right now between Ukraine and Russia. Furthermore, we see that the Russians continue their offensive operation, and during the previous 12 hours or 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly, and they have obviously crazy developments on the ground. First, let's talk about the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Batir. As usually these days, the Russians are bombing and attacking the northwestern part of the settlement, the part of the settlement that Ukrainians have logistic roads, evacuation roads. At the same time, the Russian troops continue advancing in the southeastern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlement. Today we got additional changes on the ground, and these updates were confirmed by neutral mappers, as you can see. For example, this is the situation by the beginning of the 2nd of May of 2025. This is the situation by the end of the 1st of May, and as you can see, Russian offensive started several days ago. So basically on the 30th of April, the Russians began their full-scale major offensive, and currently we see that the Russians control up to 5% or 10% of the settlement, and the most important, the Russians continue advancing. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. We have a lots of crazy developments here, and first let's talk about the western flank of this pocket. According to several mappers, the Russians managed to answer the settlement by the name of Novoalexandriivka. The clashes for this settlement have been taking place for previous 2 or 3 months or something like this, and today the Russians managed to break the Ukrainian defense finally and answer the eastern part of the settlement. So this is the situation in this direction. Let's compare the map. This is the map by the end of the 1st of May of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning. We see that the Russians at this moment control around 15 or 20% of the settlement, and the Russians currently continue advancing in the western direction. Most likely the Russians will be able to establish complete control over this small village before the 9th of May. Now let's talk about the most important update, the city of Pokrovsk. Yesterday in the evening, several resources reported that Russian soldiers were spotted in the most southern part of the settlement. When this news appeared, obviously that was something like unbelievable, but during the next several hours we got a lot of geolocations, a lot of articles that confirmed the situation. Let's discuss them in details. Yesterday in the evening on the 1st of May of 2025, several pro-Ukrainian sources published this video. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were bombing and attacking several buildings in the micro district Zelenovka, and as a result of those attacks, Ukrainians managed to destroy, basically to reduce, to ruin several buildings. The Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians sabotage and reconnaissance group were hiding in these buildings. So and later, a few more hours later, several very reliable pro-Russian resources published updated map, and according to this new version of map, the Russians indeed entered the southern part of the city of Pokrovsk. So summarize everything, we can say that currently nobody knows for sure what exactly is going on in the southern part of the city. We see that the Ukrainians don't have strong control over the southern part, but neither the Russians. So we understand that most likely this southern part of the city of Pokrovsk is something like area which is covered with the the fog of war and is something like a gray zone. We see that the Russians currently have possibilities to send sabotage and reconnaissance group in this area, but at the same time we see that the Ukrainians have possibilities to control this territory with FPV drone, and currently the Ukrainians have initiative in this direction. As for now, the Russians are trying to take this initiative in their hands. So the situation is very difficult for the southern part of the city of Pokrovsk. The clashes continue, and most likely during the next several days are going to be decisive for this part of the city. Either the Ukrainians will be able to force the Russians to fall back, or the Russians will improve their positions and to take additional streets and additional constructions under complete control. But as for now, we see that's probably the bigger, more important target for the Russians as for now is to improve their positions to the south of this micro district. There are still a lot of job to do for the Russians along the railways in the direction of the settlements of Novoukrainka and Chinshinina. So if the Russians establish complete control over these territories, then we believe we can start talking about the battle of the city of Pokrovsk itself. As for now, we believe that that was something like a sabotage and reconnaissance group that managed to enter the city, and the group was forced to fall back probably in the end, but it doesn't mean that Ukrainians managed to restore complete control over the territory. So anyway, the battle of the city of Pokrovsk has begun most likely, so let's wait and see what is going to be next. Now let's talk about the Kliban-Bykska direction. Today we have a lots of important updates, and as you can see today we have a lots of icons, which means that the Russians during the previous 12 hours managed to improve their positions, and once again the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly. First of all, let's talk about the southeastern flank of the city of Pokrovsk. Several sources reported that the Russians managed to improve their positions and to answer the village of Malinovka from the east. So something like this the Russians carry out yesterday or during the previous days. Furthermore, according to information we have, and we discussed this during the previous video, several neutral resources published this article in X social network, where we can see some photos where, according to the author of this, let's say, post, the Ukrainians managed to destroy several vehicles of the armored force of the Russian Federation that entered the city or the village of Malinovka from the east. The Russian vehicles were destroyed, and based on this video, most likely most of the mappers, mainly neutral and pro-Russian, adjusted their maps in the Russian favor. So anyway, as for now, nobody has 100% proofs that the Russians indeed improved their positions in the eastern part of Malinovka, but at the same time nobody has proofs that the Russians haven't managed to do this. We know that something happened, but as for now we don't know for sure, and nobody knows for sure whether the Russians managed to achieve their tasks or not. At the same time, we have 100% proofs and 100% sure that the Russians managed to improve their positions to the north of the settlement by the name of Tarasovka. As you can see, the map was adjusted significantly, and when talking about this configuration of map, we see that this is not just a Russian offensive, this is obviously a breakthrough of Ukrainian lines, and most likely Ukrainian defense collapsed completely. So for example, this is the situation by the end of the 1st of May of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 2nd of May. Obviously this progress is significant, and obviously it's crazy. And the most important that pro-Russian resources published this video where we can see a lot of episodes of how the Russians were beginning fighting for the settlement of Novoukrainka. A lot of FPV drone attacks, a lot of artillery strikes, a lot of destroyed positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, including mortar positions and positions of FPV drone operators. And then the Russians began their full-scale offensive, and according to this video, the Russians were using tanks and the Russians were using motorcycles. So basically this settlement was taken by the Russian motor troopers. In this video we can see a significant number of Russian motor troopers that entered the village of Novoukrainka from the south, and at the beginning of this offensive the Russians managed to take under control up to 30% of the settlement. Furthermore, and for some reason, for some unknown reason, the Ukrainians scared this offensive operation and the Ukrainians retreat. So for example, in this part we can see how a lot of Ukrainians abandoned their positions and began running. So there are a lot of Ukrainians, as you can see, and according to this raw estimation we see that there are almost the same number. Ukrainians were, let's say, 30 soldiers, and around 30 soldiers of the armored force of the Russian Federation were attacking the settlement, but for some reason the Ukrainians decided to fall back and to abandon their position. And we see that Ukrainians didn't show even any resistance, and the Russians managed to establish complete control over the southern part. And the most important, the Russians managed to take this corridor between two reservoirs, two water barriers from the south and from the north. Obviously, this is very important progress of the Russians, and most likely the Russians will continue advancing further until they take the village of Novolenovka under complete control. And most likely the Russians now have possibilities to attack the Ukrainian positions along N32 road from behind. So we expect that Ukrainians from this dense network of the fortification would be forced to fall back in the southwestern directions towards Novopoltavka even this day. So today. So this front line, this position, this defense of Ukraine armed forces collapsed completely. Most likely this pocket between all these reservists would be taken by the Russians during the next 48 hours. And then this is going to be the strongest position of the armed force of the Russian Federation before moving further in the northeastern directions towards the city of Konstantinovka. Furthermore, another group of Russian forces moved further in the northeastern direction, and currently several very reliable pro-Russian resources reported that the first groups of the armed force of the Russian Federation entered the village of Alexandropol. So maybe today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this progress, and the Minister of Defense will report that the Russians managed to establish complete control over this territory. If this information comes, obviously this is going to happen when talking about the current situation, maybe not today but tomorrow or the day after, then this is going to be the beginning of complete collapse of Ukrainians on the territory of the settlement of Zarya and villages around this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Terez direction. Today we got another geolocation from the mine, very important geolocation, and in this video we can see how Russian drone came to the area of this mine, and the Russians managed to discover a vehicle of the armed force of Ukraine. And according to the author of this video, the Ukrainians were trying to counterattack the Russians on the territory of mine, but Ukrainian vehicle was ambushed and trapped, and it stuck in some hole in the surface or something like this, and then the Russians destroyed this vehicle because the Ukrainians couldn't evacuate this. So the author of this video reported that this mine is already under complete Russian control, and in this video we can see Ukraine attempts to counterattack this area with the purpose to restore control over this territory. As for now, we haven't adjusted the map completely because we still haven't received anything from the most northern and the northwestern part of the mine, but there are already proofs, there are already statements and not very reliable proofs that the Russians control this stronghold completely. So let's wait and see, of course, but if this information is correct, then we should expect Russian attempts to attack and intensifying of Russian offensives in the direction of Kliban-Byk water reservoir with the purpose to, let's say, to tighten the news around Ukraine positions in this pocket. Obviously, this pocket is already done. It's just a matter of time when the Russians will be able to cut this pocket completely. Now let's move further. Let's discuss the situation around the city of Chasiv Yar, where the Russians continue. And as we discussed during the previous videos, the Russians moved their focus, or they changed their focus, and now the Russians are concentrated and are trying to carry out as many as possible offensives to the north of the city of Chasiv Yar with the purpose to improve their positions along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. As for now, the main clashes and the main activities are taking place to the west of the settlement of Grigorovka. This video was published by the Ukrainian side, and in this video we can see how the Ukrainians were trying to counterattack the stronghold, to the west of the settlement of Grigorovka. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking positions of the armed force of the Russian Federation. Based on this video we have adjusted this map and we have adjusted this forest. Now we see that the Russians are trying to move further in the western direction from the settlement of Grigorovka with the purpose to get canals of Seversky Donetsk-Donbass and to maintain the lines and maybe to cross this canal with the purpose to move further in the direction of the settlements of Maiska and in the direction of the settlement by the name of Markova. So the situation for the Ukrainians in this direction is getting worse and worse every day. As for the Sivas direction, we are waiting for additional updates this upcoming 24 hours. As for the Liman direction, we have another, let's say, adjustment on the map based on the video that was published by the Ukrainian side. Furthermore, several neutral mappers also reconfirmed Russian progress on the ground, and this is the video we're talking about. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainians were, after withdrawing the Russians in this area, attacking the Russians, and this is probably the most important episode. In this episode we can see a biker who was moving along the village of Tarskoye, and this biker was attacked by FPV drone. Telling the truth, most of the mappers adjusted their maps based on this video, but I've noted one important detail. If you take a look at this biker, you're gonna see a white flag, let's say on his right leg, which means that most likely either it was, let's say, Ukrainian soldier using Russian bike and retreating, let's say, towards the Ukrainian positions, or this was, let's say, Russian soldier who decided to surrender, so that is why he was using a white flag. But for some reason the Ukrainians decided to attack him. Maybe they didn't synchronize, those Ukrainians that were attacking the Russian soldier didn't synchronize information with other groups of Ukrainian forces in this direction. Very difficult to understand, but we see that this is the situation. Anyway, as for now, we have adjusted the map because we have several very reliable sources who confirm that something is happening here right now, and maybe by the morning of this 2nd of May of 2025, the Russians managed to take under control up to 50% of the settlement of Tarskoye. As for the northern directions, we have just one important update. The Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to establish complete control over around 75% of the settlement of Belovody. So the Russians, just one micro district left for the Russians. We are talking about the most southeastern part of the settlement. The Russians most likely will try to take this territory under complete control during the next several hours or even days. But some pro-Russian resources reported that this part of Belovody was also taken by the Russians during the previous days. So this is the situation, and as we can see, the Russians are getting closer and closer to the settlement of Yunakivka from many directions, from the northwest, from the north, and from the northeast. Most likely the battle for the settlement of Yunakivka is going to start maybe even before the 9th of May. And that's it for today. For the short video, Military Summary channel reminds to we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.